Good morning and welcome to Studio Time with Deb online. This is the online version. Today we're going to be talking about tube settings, and I'm going to talk to you about the materials, the tools, the supplies, and how to do it. I do want to do a reminder that I don't mind being interrupted for questions, and what you need to do is to unmute yourself, ask your questions, and then mute yourself again so that we don't get too many competing voices going on at once. The other thing that I want to tell you is that if you ask a question, you're going to be part of a video. We are recording this meeting. And so if you don't want to be part of a recording, then what you need to do is to wait until later, until the end, and ask me something after I've closed the formal part of the meeting. Susan and I have been very, very, very busy and working very hard for you guys on getting these videos together. She has been editing something fierce and holding my hand through YouTube and everything else. And I want you to know that the first weeks, other than the one I forgot to record, are up on YouTube and you can view them. The channel is Studio Time with Deb. So if you go to Studio Time with Deb, and you click the little red bell, I think it tells me when you look at it, but I think it also tells you when I put up a new video. So at least for now, they're going to be up there. They're free. They're open to look at. You can go through them. I'm going to give you a lot of information today. So a lot of that will be there that you can go back and look at again. And that should be helpful to you. So tube stone setting. I'm going to start with a slideshow. I put all of this on slides for you today. So we're going to start with tools and supplies for tube stone setting. Calipers. I recommend Harbor Freight calipers. They're perfectly good for what we do. They're the 6-inch ones are good if you're going to carry them in your toolbox. They also sell a 4-inch variety. They're under $20. I've had ones for years and years and years. They work very, very well. Digital is easier for most of what we do than the dial calipers. But if you have dial ones and you're familiar with them and you use them, that's great. Stone setting burr set. This is a set from 1 millimeter to 5.5 millimeters. You don't need an entire set. If you only set 3 millimeter stones, then you only need probably a 2.7, a 2.9, a 3, and a 3.2, and you're done. So it kind of depends on what you're after. This one has a pretty good variety and a pretty good increment of sizes. Tube setting punches, that is not what Rio calls them, and that's not technically what they're for, but that is what we use them for, and there's the number for them. Bezel setting tool needs to be altered. A bezel setting tool comes, it's too long, it's sharp, you will have to alter it. Sticky wax. This is what we use to pick up stones with, because otherwise they just go wherever they want. I take the sticky wax, it comes in a little box in long rectangular strips, and I take it and roll it into a little cone shape. I'll show it to you later. Sterling tubing. Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about the sterling tubing because I want you to understand what you need so that you can figure out what to order. You need thick wall. And Monster Slayer or Rio, either one are great sources for this. But what you need to do is that you need to check in their measurements the outside diameter, OD, and inside diameter, ID, okay? So you need to check the OD and the ID, and what you need to do is that the outside diameter needs to be at least a 0.5 millimeter bigger than your stone. The inside diameter needs to be at least 0.5 millimeter smaller than your stone. And one way you can check this, if you have tubing and you want to see if it's going to be the right size, is that you can hold the tubing upright, put the stone on top of it. If the stone falls through, the tubing is too big, obviously. If the stone sits on top of it, you need to look down on it and be sure that you see silver all the way, or gold, all the way around it. If you don't see metal all the way around your stone, there's not enough metal there when you cut your seat for the stone to sit down and be held in properly. So I've given you how to figure it out, and then what you need to do is you're going to have to look these up as you order your tubing. Monster Slayer has a pretty good chart about OD and ID. Rio doesn't. Rio has only, you have to go down into their description and look at their OD and ID for figuring out what's going on. Tube settings, I specified the ones from Rio. And the reason I specified them from Rio is because I know that these are die struck. And if you're gonna buy tube settings that are already done, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit more in a minute, but if you're gonna buy ones that are already made, they come in these sizes from Rio, and the die struck is critical. Cast ones, I have had such bad luck with cast ones. I tend to break them. I finally melted all mine. I just got rid of them. So they tend to be very brittle and they don't set well. And they're also not as pretty as the die struck ones. So there's the die struck ones. This is the parts of a stone. And I want you to do this because we need to be speaking the same vocabulary. So the table is the top. The crown is that top little section. The girdle is the fattest part. Pavilion is the lower part. And then culet is the bottom. This is the diameter of the stone that we're going to be measuring, the girdle of the stone. That's what we're going to measure with the calipers. And you need to measure a stone in several places. You always have to, I want you to measure your stone every time. Just because you buy 3mm stones from somebody does not mean they're 3mm. You can have 3mm stones that are 2.7, 2.9, 3.4, 3.2, and they're going to call them all 3. So you need to measure every one of them every time if you're going to do tube setting, because it's critical how that tube fits that stone. You also need to use stones that are hard, preferably 7 or above on the Mohs hardness scale. If you use softer ones, the problem with it is that they tend to shatter if they don't, and seating them can be a real issue. So I would stay away from anything like apatite or opal or any of the faceted ones that are really soft. You want to go with a harder stone. You'll do fine. You can get calibrated stones. You pay a premium for calibrated stones. Calibrated stones means that if it says it's 3mm, it is 3mm. But you do pay a premium for that. So most of us don't do that. This is what the stone is going to look like when it's sitting on the tube. So you can see the stone there. You can see that the tube is both smaller than the girdle of the stone and larger than the girdle of the stone. If that doesn't happen, you're not going to be able to cut a seat and you're not going to be able to hold the stone in. This is what happens when it cuts a seat. So when we cut the seat, I'm going to go over this again, but when we cut the seat's going to, the opening for that is going to be very slightly smaller than your stone. And that means that the stone may not just shove down in there. You may have to really shove it down, which is one reason we don't want a soft stone. You're going to take it, you're going to burr this out. So how far down you burr is a little bit hard to tell. And what you're going to look for is that you want to look for the stone when it's in there to be even with or just barely above the top of your tube. I'll have a picture for you that in a minute. If you use a burr that's too large, your stone will always set crooked. Always, always, always. I don't know how it does that. I have never figured out why it won't just go to the bottom and sit there, but it doesn't. I guarantee you, if your burr is too big, your stone will be crooked. This is what it should look like when a stone is down in there. The stone should be even with or very slightly proud of the top of the tube. This is when we start closing it over, how it's going to look when we get it closed over. This is what it looks like when you're looking down on a tube. This is not set. This is just seeing if this tube is the right size for this stone. See how I can see metal all the way around it? But the stone didn't fall down to the bottom of the tube, right? The stone is sitting there. So this tube would work. Now, if I move my stone a little bit and my stone wants to fall through, that means I probably don't have enough material for a seat on it. This one is stable. It's very stable on there, and I see material all the way around. So this is a good tube for this stone. So this is a stone setting. I'm going to walk you through how to do this. This is a purchased tube setting that was soldered in place. After it was soldered in place, then it was opened up from the back. And I do this when I can. Sometimes you can't do this with a tube setting, but a lot of times, most of the time you can. So what I will do is to take a small drill bit, I'll drill a small hole in there, and then I take a cylinder burr and I carve out to almost the full diameter of the tube. And then I will use a needle file, a round needle file, or depending on the size of it, a half round. And I will clean it up. What I want is that the opening in the bottom is even with the inside of the tube. It's exactly the same. Because if I leave a little ledge there, that's where people tend to, or people, where junk tends to collect. And it'll get dirty under there. And there's really not a good way to clean it. This is what a stone burr set looks like. Now, if you get the one that I specified from Rio, you don't get the cute little wooden case. I buy the little wooden cases, and see the numbers that are written on there? I write those on there, and that's because I do not want to have to measure my burrs every single time. Now, that being said, in a classroom situation, I do measure them every time, because students are not always good about putting the burrs back in the burr space that has the right number on it. So you do need to be careful. You do need to be sure you're using the right burr. And for this method, for this technique, you might double check it, because like I said, too big a burr is really going to be a problem for you. So this is the stone burr I chose. This is the stone that I have. So what I'm going to do is go straight down, and I do this by hand with the flex shaft. I go little by little by little. And what I do is to look, I'm going to go back. I look at my burr right here. See my burr? That is where the girdle of the stone is. So I can say the table is going to be about here. So I know I want to go about to there on my burr. So when I'm drilling this, I know how far down to go. So this is the stone sitting in there. It's a little bit crooked because I haven't shoved it in all the way, because I want to make sure that everything else is okay, that I'm about where I should be. So I look at the lower end of it and I make sure that it's about where it should sit in there. The other advantage of opening up the back is that if I do push this stone all the way in at this point, and it's going to be really snug, I can also push it back out. I can use a bamboo skewer or a wooden dowel or something and shove it back out of there. If I don't have an opening in the back and I shove the stone in there and it's not big enough and it doesn't seat, I am really in trouble. I can't get the stone back out of there. These are the stone setting tools, or the tube setting tools. They are really for setting, they're designed for setting prongs. And what they're designed for is to set all 4 prongs at once, so that you take a 4-prong or 6-prong round stone and you gently push on it, and it closes all of them down evenly, so that you don't have the problem of the stone moving for one side or the other. We can use these for tube setting as well. And what you're going to do is to choose one that just fits over the tube. You don't want to catch the edge of it, so you want to be sure it fits over the tube, but you want the smallest one that does hang over a little bit. And that's the one you're going to use first. Then you're going to go to a larger one, and you might even go to a third larger one. You do have to watch as you get larger that the tube setting tool does not touch the bottom of the piece, what's around the tube. It only touches the tube. So you do have to watch that, because as they get bigger, they will do that. The reason we start small and go bigger, you can imagine, is because it closes the tube in a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more as you get bigger, because you get to a flatter part of the curve in the tube setting tool. And with these, I use a little brass hammer. This is the one that I use that I love. It's from Pauline Warg. I have been unable to find them anywhere else. You guys could contact Pauline and see if she still sells them. A chasing hammer also works really well. You want something that's kind of medium weight, not heavy, not light. And normally, depending on what you're setting, but for silver, we'll use kind of a lot of medium blows when we're doing this. If you're doing 14 karat, you might have to use a really sharp blow to get that 14 karat to set down, because it's much tougher than any of you think it is. All right, so you're going to, after you have burred and you believe that you have the right depth and everything is good, you're going to look at the tube again. You need to make sure the top is finished and pretty. You need to make sure the outside is pretty. And then what you're going to do is that you're going to set the tool, or set the stone. So I'm going to put the stone in there. And what I normally do with the stone, you saw how on the previous slide it was a little bit crooked. I take that and I push it up against the side of my wooden bench so that I push the stone into the setting with the wood. You could also use a dowel rod. You don't want to pound on it. You just want to gently push it in there. It should push in. And push it, make sure that it's level, that it's sitting absolutely level. It shouldn't fall out when you turn the piece upside down. It should be that snug. If it's not that snug, you've done something wrong. You've used too big a burr. So I'm going to use the tube set now that just fits over the stone and the setting, just fits over the setting. I'm going to hammer that in place. Now I went to a larger one. And if you look at the stone, you can see, look at the difference. See how this one is open and this one is closed a little bit? So it has already started to close in. I'm going to go to a larger one, and then I'm going to do that. This one is too large. Can you see that it's hitting the bottom? It's hitting my piece. I can't use it. So if I need to close the stone in more than that, what I can do is to close it in by hand. I can use the bezel pusher. I can close it in by hand, or I could use a burnisher and close it in by hand. And that would work too. And that's what it looks like finished. So this is a ring that I made, and I want to show you some of the unusual pieces. Well, this is an unusual one. This one is on the bottom of the stone setting, on the bottom of the tube setting, is soldered a tube, which actually goes inside the tube stone setting a little bit. And then inside that is a rivet wire that goes all the way through the felt and down into the ring and is riveted at the bottom. And that's what holds everything together. So the assembly for this, I drew it. Ha! This took me forever. This is how it's assembled. There is the ring at the bottom, right here. There's the ring. This is the felt thing. There's an interior wire up here. This is the tube setting. This is the outside tube, and it sits on top of the washer. This is an interior tube that holds between the ring and the washer. And this is the rivet wire. The reason we need this tube number 2, this interior tube, is because if I didn't have that, when I go to set this, because the felt is soft, this rivet wire will just bend, it won't set. But if I have heavy wall tubing in here, it won't allow that wire to bend. It'll keep it straight while I'm setting the inside here. I'm going to tell you all about it. I soldered the tube setting to the thick-walled tube. The thick-walled tube fits just inside the tube setting, okay? And then I soldered the wire inside the tube number 1. So I had a long old wire inside tube number 1. Then what I did was I made the washer. I made sure that it was a snug fit on my wire. I drilled a hole in the ring. I made sure that was a snug fit on my wire. I fitted the number 2 tube, the one down here, that's going to hold my wire straight. We're looking at a kind of a section drawing.
Yeah.
Right.
So the washer is here. There's a tube up here. There's a tube down here. There's a wire that goes all the way through. So then what I do is assemble the thing. I've got the tube with the setting, with this tube with the tube setting with the wire in it. I slip on the washer. I slipped on the second tube. I forced the felt ball on over the second tube. And then I put it through the ring, and then I riveted it. And then I set the stone in the top. So setting the stone in the top, the tube setting is the very last thing that happens. Here, I'm going to go back. That's what it looks like.
Okay, Deb, the wire fits snugly into the containing tube?
Yes.
Okay.
Very tight. Otherwise, it will bend.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And
All right.
how did you get access to the rivet inside the ring shank?
I knew somebody would ask me that. So what I did is that I turned the, actually I was waiting for that, Monica. Good job. I turned the entire assembly upside down because you have, when you set the stone, you have to be on a hard surface. If you're not on a metal hard surface, then it's not going to set, right? Okay, and same for a rivet. You have to be on a metal hard surface to back it up. So what I did before I set the stone, I turned the whole assembly upside down. I put up inside the tube setting a small metal rod that fit exactly up inside the tube setting. That was my support. That's like my mini anvil. And then on the bottom, down here where I set it, I took an old stamp. I think it was a 18 karat or a something that had gotten abused and obliterated. And I cleaned that off and I made that an absolute smooth punch that was a ring punch. So I took my ring stamp.
That was brilliant.
Yeah, I took my ring stamp, turned it into a punch, and then I'm able to set that rivet. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you a series of slides. A lot of this is my work because I use tube settings a lot in my work. I think they're really beautiful. They are clean. They are it's just like a little kiss somewhere. It's like a kiss on a piece. This is what happens with live video, guys. So I use tube settings a lot. I think that they don't detract like prongs do. They hold up really well. I tend to be very hard on my jewelry when I wear it. And tube settings are ones that wear very, very well. So this down here is a little tube setting. It's set in, it's a little diamond set in 14 karat. This is a close-up of that. This is a reticulation ring and a little, I believe that's a brown diamond. Amethyst. You can see on tube sets how they sit a little bit proud of the piece. You'll see it more on this one. So this is a pendant. I want you to look at the bail also, considering the last talk we had. But you can see how right here, this sticks up a little bit. That's important in a tube set. In order to be able to tube set, we have to be able to get something there to close that down, like a bezel. We have to be able to close that down, right? And whether you use the tube setting tools or whether you use a hammer hand piece or whether you use a bezel pusher or a burnisher, you still have to be able to get to it. So you have to be able to do something to close that down around the piece. These are fused earrings. Those are Malayan garnets in gold. This is the toggle, which I talked to you about a couple times ago too. And it's got a little tube set ruby in the end of it. There. This is also a toggle. That's a London blue, I believe, topaz. Little garnet. This is a garnet.
Deb?
Yeah.
So on all those, those like, especially those fused ones, you're like, are you getting the whole thing done and then sticking the little tube on there?
Well, I mean, it's part of the process of building the piece, right? The tube gets soldered on. The stone gets set last, but the tube gets soldered on whenever.
Like, did you finish that? Did you finish that whole thing and then stick that little guy in there? Or?
You mean as far as setting the stone or as far as soldering it on?
The tube, like actually soldering the setting on.
Typically with building pieces, we work from largest to smallest. So often the tube will be one of the later pieces you'll do because it's so small, but that's not always true. So you can solder it on whenever. You could solder it on first and then work the rest, but then you would tend to mangle it. So usually it's a later piece,
okay, but
it doesn't have to be. This one in particular, I don't have a side view of this, but this one is made from a tube, not made from a pre-made setting. And if you can almost see it if you look down a little bit. It's quite a bit taller than the standard tube is. These are diamonds and rubies.
I have a question about setting diamonds. You can set the diamond in the tube and then solder that on after, correct?
You know, Monica, I used to do that, but I don't anymore. The fakes that are out, well, they're not fakes. The diamonds that are poor quality, in China, one of the things that they've been doing is to use really high pressure and really high refractive index plastic and pushing that in so that even under a microscope, it is difficult to tell that the diamond has flaws in it. And if you heat up one of those, then all of the plastic melts and you have just destroyed the stone. So I used to do that. I used to do prong tipping, and I don't do that anymore. I would set it afterwards, always. So this one is also a little diamond. These are diamonds set on top of garnets on the bottom. And more diamonds. These are brown diamonds. This is a huge citrine. This is like 11 millimeters. This is a little, pretty sure it's a garnet. That's an iolite. And that's a garnet. And a garnet. And 3 little iolites. Here they are. And garnets. And iolites. I think I just do garnets and iolites. That's all I need. Oh, and rubies. That's a little ruby. Garnets. Notice the forged element. I want you to pay attention to that after the last week's talk about forging. This is the pair I'm wearing today, and these I'm going to show you in just a minute, but these are, so Jan, one day to class, brought me one of those shower heads, you know, those rain shower heads, the great big ones. They're like, I don't know, 9 inches in diameter or something, and they just rain on you. And it wasn't working, and she had to pull it out of her shower. But all of the little spigots, each little place where it rains from is brass. And she brought it in. She said, I thought you would like these. That's what this is. So this is the back side of it. The front side that you see when it's in your shower is over here. And then what I did here, that's the back, that's the side you see in the shower. So what I did was to ball up a wire. I put it through there. I bent it up into the ear wire. And then on this part, it took a 4 millimeter stone perfectly. So I put it in there and set it. Now they are brass. I annealed them, but they were not meant to be pushed over. And there's several of them I split and had to redo. These are from a guitar. Somebody gave me a whole bunch of guitar strings and then these things, which I guess is what the guitar string goes on. I'm not even sure what parts these are. I think they're gold plated only because they haven't tarnished or turned in my studio in forever, but they would also make beautiful little tube settings. This is Roger Reimel's work, and he does a lot of flush setting and tube setting. I'm going to go through these. This is Sydney Lynch's work. She also incorporates a lot of tube settings. Tube settings go nicely with bezel settings. They're kind of the faceted stone complementary, you know, faceted stone version of a bezel set. This is the back side of the bracelet. There's the front side, tube settings. This is Charity Hall's work. This is the back side. And I want you to see that from the back, she left the tubes kind of, they're just kind of hanging out there, but they make a nice little design the way they are. This is, she often does from the front. This is the back of a piece also. Notice how here she's using it as a decorative element, and here in the back of the piece. This is the front. She's got tube settings all around. One thing Charity does is that she uses all the same size stones. She needs like 3 burrs, and that is it, because she always uses the same size little faceted stones. There's a lot to be said for that. This is the back of that same piece. Notice how she has used this tube set stones here and here in her mechanism. So you can also tube set other shapes. You don't have to just do round. Round is easy. You can use the punches for that. We don't have any punches for square or rectangular or anything else. Making the seat for these can be really, really tricky. So the seat on a stone, where it sits, how it sits, is unforgiving. If you don't have a stone that seats well, if you don't seat the stone well, then everything else is just not going to work. It's just going to be a nightmare. So you have to be sure that it seats well. And you can imagine from the round one what it would have to look like for a square or a rectangular or a trillion or something else. And so what you're going to have to do is to make something where that stone can sit down in there, and then you have the top to turn over. And it is a lot trickier. This has a chisel top to it. And so for a chisel top, and you can do chisel tops on round stones as well. And what you do for a chisel top is that you leave an extra thick tube so that the stone can seat, but you've got a lot of tube on the top. And then when you set it, it's just a matter of taking a chisel or a hammer handpiece or a punch. And what you do is that you upset that edge so that that edge gets a little bit bigger. It gets bigger on the outside and the inside. And when it gets bigger on the inside, that's what holds that stone in place. This is another one of Charity's.
Deb?
Yeah.
On the prior round piece, the last round piece you showed, back one more. Notice that she double set those stones. They're set on the back and the front.
They're set back and front. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, when you set the second one, you do need to be a bit careful that you don't pound on the first one, right? But yeah, you can set them end to end. Absolutely. This is Allison Antleman. Those are all hollow forms, all the pieces around there. This is Jamie Conkel's. So she did a series of bangle bracelets. One has screws in it, one has tube rivets, and one has the tube set stones. Here's the tube set stone one, all the way around. See how they're opened up in the back? Christie Jagger made this one. This is that's her mother's and father's wedding bands that are hung on a hook in the middle. And then the 3 stones are the birthstones of the 3 girls. And it opens up, it's a locket. Jeanette Parker made this one. Tube set, square and round. So this is some donut stones, and I'm going to show you. So the donut stone slips over the tube, and then the tube is widened out on the top, like we did a tube rivet. It's widened out a little bit. And then, because we use super thick wall tubing, you can take a burr, set that down in there, and set a stone in the middle of the tube. And I've got a series of these to show you. And then I've got a diagram to show you. And Kathy, I know last week you asked me about that setting the stone, we broke a lot of the donuts. I figured out how not to do that. That one's not set, obviously, but that's, see, it's widened out. So this is how we're gonna do it. What we're gonna do, this is the donut stone here. This is a short tube, and what the short tube does is that it protects the donut stone and keeps this inner tube straight. Okay, so I've got two tubes. I've got one that's gonna be my faceted stone setting, which is this one. And I've got one that's really short right here that's just gonna go inside the donut. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to, whatever my donut stone is, I'm going to make sure, get a tube that fits inside that or grind it for a tube that fits in that. I want these two tubes to telescope. I want them to fit really well together. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is after they're together, they're soldered on, everything is fine, I'll slip the donut on. After I slip the donut on, I'm going to widen this part here. I'm going to pull this out. Now this actually has to get pulled out further than what I have it drawn. This should probably be shorter than what I have it drawn in order to hold that donut in place. It's gonna come and it's gonna come over more to hold that really tight. But then, because this tube is extra thick, I'm gonna set it, tube set it the same way I would normally. I would set any tube set stone. Laura Union made this. Carol Kornevsky. Some of these are set and some of these are not, but it's a series of rings. They can have tube sets in them. And you can do fancy things with the tube sets, drill holes in them, make slits in them, do all kinds of fancy stuff. Leslie McCowan. And Daniel Spirer. This is Marni Ryan's work, and she uses tube set stones a fair amount, just here and there, just little dots of diamonds. These are kind of interesting. If you look at them, it's just the disc just has a hole in it and slips over. You could do, if you have the top of gold earrings, they could even be something forged, something whatever. And then you can just slip other ones off and on. How fun is that? This is Charities again. Notice on this one, the ring band, she's got a tube set here, right here in the middle, right, see right there, in between the two bands, in addition to the one on the top. This is a wire wrapping, but this one is a tube set. It's soldered onto this sheet right here. The rest of them are wire wrapped. Okay. All right, so that was a lot of slides today. So there's a couple things I want to show you still. One is, can you see this ring? And see how that stone is set up really high like that? So this is a challenge because remember that when I set this stone, it has to have support underneath it. If it's not supported underneath when I go to set this, it's not going to work. So what I do, this is just a piece of steel, and it will fit underneath, you see, underneath that setting. So what I would do is to take this piece of steel, put it in a vise, slip my ring on, and now I can set this stone. You have to think about that you have to support underneath. If I just take this ring and I slip it on a ring mandrel, that stone setting is not supported. What's going to happen is I'm going to crush the entire ring. Okay? So I have to have something that fits underneath it here to support that setting when I set that stone. I want to show you also one of the advantages of using a tube versus using a pre-made tube. When you use a tube, you can make it really tall. See how tall this one is? And there's occasion where you may want to do that. You might want a setting that's super tall for whatever reason. If you want one that's taller than standard, then you're going to have to make it. The other advantage for making your own settings from tube is that you can really, really get an accurate size. The stone settings that I showed you, the ones that are commercially available, they come in the 3mm, 4, 5, 6, and 8, I think. And if your stone doesn't fit into one of those, you're in trouble. If you have a 3.5mm stone, it doesn't really fit into any of them nicely. What you need to do in that case is that you need the tube, you need to figure out which tube you need, and then you need to burr your own tube, cut your own tube and burr your own tube. Cutting tubing, I'll address that for just a minute. I have a tube jig that I really like. You can use any kind of tubing jig, whatever works for you. Most tubing jigs, you're still going to have to even up the end of it. And it's just a matter of getting body mechanics right, getting your file right. I recommend a large file rather than a small file for filing the end. I also recommend, once you choose a tube, file the end, make it flat when it's long, okay? Cut your tube off a little taller than you think you need it to be, solder it onto your piece, and then file the other side flat. Because then you've got something to hang on to and you've got something to judge the relative whether it's flat or not, right? It's much easier to do that way when you're holding on to a larger tube than if you're trying to file both ends of something that's only 1/8 of an inch tall or a 1/16 of an inch tall. Close together. You do have to be able to set these stones. If you cannot get a stone setting tool in there, or like a tube setting tool, or a bezel pusher or something like that in there, if you can't get a tool in there, then you can't set these in a tube. There are pieces that I'm sure you've seen that are out there that look like it's a whole bunch of tubes all soldered together, all flat, and you know, all just right next to each other, and then it has stones set in it. They look like tube set stones. Most of the time they're not. Those are flush set stones in super thick walled tubing. They're using the thick walled tubing to act like sheet to flush set the stone in there. So sometimes when you see those, if it's not the tube really closing down around it, look carefully, it's probably flush set. All right.
I have a question, Deb.
Yes.
You mentioned sterling tubing, but when
Yes.
we use bezel wire, we use fine to silver. So why not use fine silver tubing?
You can. You can use fine, you can use sterling. I typically use sterling because I have a lot more choices available for thick wall tube. For fine silver, I don't have nearly as many choices. If you can find what you want in fine silver, I don't see a problem with it. It's going to hold in and it's going to be fine. So it's not a problem. It's just a matter of choice, that it's very difficult sometimes to find the size you need in that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Deb, I also have a question about stone on stone with the tube settings.
Uh-huh.
I know that you did the donut style. Is there a way that you can do this without using glue with a stone on the stone?
Yeah, you could do kind of a combination of the donut thing, or you could even do the donut thing that I did. Or you could do, actually the donut would work just fine, wouldn't it?
Like a telescoping tube in tube style thing?
Right,
Okay.
right. And the other alternative that you could do is like the ring that I showed at the very beginning, where you put a tube in and then the stone setting soldered onto a wire and then rivet from the back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I think either one of those would work. It would depend on your application. It would depend on what you want to do with it. I know that most of the time those are glued in. They're still in setting, so you would glue the pin, right? So that it's very secure. But I know that most of the time those are glued in. So Shalon sent me this, and she had a couple of questions and a couple of issues with this. These are hollow forms that she made. And the center one, if you look at the bottom of the center one, it's rounded a little bit. It's not a square. And that bothers her, that it's just her eye is drawn to that. One of the things that happens when we're doing designs is that when they don't turn out exactly like what we think they were going to be, you know, what they were going to be when they grew up, then it's hard to see them any other way other than a failure. And I don't see these as a failure at all. I think they're wonderful pieces. Now, I have to tell you that Shalon sent me this wasn't it last night, Shalon, or was it yesterday? Or
Both.
yeah, it was pretty late in the evening that I
With
got this.
community.
And I woke up at 4:30, not very awake. And I wasn't going to turn on lights because I was determined to go back to sleep, which I didn't do. But what I did do is I grabbed my sketchbook that's beside my bed. And what I want to show you, now you guys need to remember what these look like, okay? Because I saw these last night and I was thinking about her issue and her problem and what to tell her about that. And what I did was to grab my sketchbook and I drew this at 4:30 in the morning. I did not turn the light on. A lot of the drawings don't even match up at all. But what this did is it documented my ideas of what I want to tell her. So, and things that I think would work with that. So this one has a forged element underneath it that follows that rounded curve. This one, I thought these two were more equal in size. What I remembered at 4:30 in the morning was not exactly what they were. So this one is a pair of earrings where it has a rounded top on one, a square top on the other, and then maybe wire. These two are put on wire in her earrings. This has a forged element and a stone. This one, who knows what I was drawing. This one matches, if you move this over and move this over, they match up. I don't know if you guys are familiar with contour drawing. Contour drawing is the one that when you put a pencil down and you study whatever it is that you're drawing, you don't pick your pencil up and you don't look at your paper, you just draw. And what that does is that it really helps you clarify what's important, what's not important. It's a really kind of interesting and fun thing to do. That's what I feel like I do with a Sharpie marker at 4:30 in the morning when I refuse to turn the light on, but I have a sketchbook there. But it's enough that for the most part, I can document my ideas with this. So I'm going to go back. I want to go back to this real quick. So on this piece here in the middle, if I put an element in here that looks like this, there, that's not very good, but you know what I mean. Say it's a forged element and it goes underneath it like that. Okay, and then I would lose this piece. Or I was actually thinking of flipping the whole thing over. But something where rather than getting rid of the this curved bottom, what you're doing is accenting it. You're making it even more than it was. See how if I put something under there that's curved, it almost looks like that's what it's supposed to be? Does that make sense, Shalon? Shalon?
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at this for a sec. So the other thing is that I think what you are not wild about is the asymmetry of it. What if I came in here with a forged element that did something like this? And then you could do, oh, I like that I can move that. And then I got to practice with this some more. Here, I'm going to draw a stone. Okay, and then move it. I'm going to put the stone right there. Look at that. And then it changes the relationship. I think part of the problem with what you're doing is that you're trying to make this all really symmetrical. And that this is throwing you off. You've got a, all straight line here. It's just not enough of a curve. I think if you take this bottom piece and flip it over, and so that it's a curve against curve versus curve against straight, that you would be happier. One of the things that I do is that I lay things on my sketchbook, and then I do things exactly like this, where I sketch around them until I find something that makes me happy, something that I figure I can go with that and start playing with things. So I would just keep moving them around and sketching until you figure out what it is that you like, and turn them different directions. Don't worry about it. Flip them upside down, flip them sideways, put this one over here on its side, put this one underneath. Keep playing with them. But I think part of the issue is losing the preconception of what you thought it would look like when you started.
Exactly. That's exactly the problem.
Yeah,
I
because
had
you've
an
got really nice
idea.
pieces. Those are really nice pieces, and they're really fun pieces. But I think that because they're not exactly what you anticipated them being, you're not happy.
Do you
Right.
ever photocopy or print out things like that and then like Sharpie marker draw on them? Because that was always helpful in engineering. I don't know if it would be in this sort of thing.
The thing
That's a
with
good
this is I want to change the relationship of them. So I want to be able, so what I do is I put them on a sketchbook and then I sketch around them. And then when I find something I like, I will draw around them and do that. But I want to be able to move them around. I want to be able to play with them like they're little parts of something else, that I can just play with.
That's what they are now.
Yeah. So does that make a lot of sense? Does that mean, does that help you with what you're doing for your design?
Yes, I needed you to tell me to move on, do something.
Yeah, not only move on, but move on and play with it. And then, like I said, I mean, I really like some of these. I love these two right here that are earrings that that could be open wire, or it could be sheet, or it could be, I don't know. And because this one is smaller than this one, you might even want to do like a wire square around it, or I don't know. But I think some of those are pretty cool. See what I do at 4:30 in the morning? I didn't even turn the light on. I didn't look at the paper. It was in my head, so I drew it down. That's what I did. I put it on paper. That was it.
I have one question. Is it too late to add a stone to them?
No, why would it be too late?
Because I would dent it or something.
Well, be sure you don't. So what you cannot do, don't. What you can't do is that you can't solder a tube setting on the top of the, like on the top of the hollow form, right? What you could do is to drill a hole in the top of the hollow form, make a tube that goes all the way down to the bottom so that when you're setting it, it has support underneath it.
Okay.
And then you could tube set something. Or you could solder on a bezel, and then don't really mash on it hard. Because they will cave in, right? They're not super thick.
Right.
But you could bezel set a stone, you could tube set a stone, you could prong set a stone. Sure, you could add to it. You could also add to the side of it. Like the one I've drawn a couple times, this guy down here.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a element and I've got a stone. So there's no reason that you can't do that, right?
Right.
Okay. So I want to thank you for joining me today for the Studio Time with Deb, the online version. I want to remind you that I will see you next week, next Thursday, 10 o'clock. I'll send out a reminder again. I also want to let you know about the YouTube video that these are being videotaped, and if you do studio time with Deb, you will find it.